We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It's probably, the most famous sentence in the English language, maybe in all of history. It's the bumper sticker for the American experiment, the bedrock of the culture. But, we usually just sort of nod along with it. We don't really stop to think about how weird those 6 words actually are.
It is so deceptive. We treat it like this pillar of stone, something that has always existed. But when you really dig into the origins, that phrase isn't some static fact. It's a battlefield. It's the result of fierce editing wars, ancient theology, political maneuvering, and some truly intense contradictions.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at the biography of a single sentence. We've pulled together a massive stack of source material here. We're talking original historical drafts of the Declaration, analysis from historians like Jack Rakove from Stanford and Howard Zinn, and even some obscure congressional resolutions, all to figure out a central mystery. How could a document declaring equality be written by slave owners? And how has the meaning of all men changed from a self-evident truth to a self-evident lie? And, well, back again.
It's a wild journey. It really is. It's a phrase that has been weaponized by revolutionaries, dictators, and civil rights leaders alike.
So let's start at the very beginning, the authorship. If we played trivia right now and I asked who wrote the Declaration of Independence, everyone says Thomas Jefferson.
And they'd get maybe half points for that.
Sure.
Jefferson certainly penned the draft in June of 1776. He was absolutely the wordsmith. But the specific flavor of that sentence, the philosophical punch of it, that owes a huge debt to Benjamin Franklin.
I love this part of the research. It's the ultimate example of why everyone needs a good editor.
Absolutely. So you have to picture the scene. Jefferson drafts this thing. He hands it over to Franklin. And in Jefferson's original version, he wrote, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable."
Sacred and undeniable. Wow, that feels heavier, more religious somehow.
Exactly. Sacred implies the truth comes from God. It's dogmatic. It requires faith. If something is sacred, you don't question it, but you also can't prove it. Franklin took pen, crossed out sacred and undeniable, and wrote in self-evident.
Why does that one word change matter so much?
Well, it changes the entire foundation of the argument. Self-evident is a term from the Enlightenment. It's the language of science and reason. Think about geometry. A self-evident truth is an axiom, like the whole is greater than the part. You don't need a priest to tell you that. You just look at nature and you see it.
So Franklin was basically saying, we don't need the church to justify our freedom. It's a scientific fact.
Precisely. It moved the entire argument from the pulpit to the laboratory. It was a radical shift to base a government on reason rather than divine right.
But here's the thing that really surprised me in the notes. We give the founders credit for inventing this idea of equality, but they didn't just pull it out of thin air, did they?
No, not at all. Not even close. If you look at the lineage of the idea, it's like a relay race that spans 1,000 years. You can go all the way back to Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century. He wrote in his Moralia in Job that nature produces all men equal. It's only sin that creates hierarchy.
So it actually started as a theological idea.
Right, and then it pops up in the wildest places. Look at the Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381. There was this radical priest, John Ball, and he used to preach to the crowds asking, "When Adam delved in Eve's span, who was then the gentleman?"
That is such a great line. Basically, when Adam was digging in the dirt and Eve was spinning thread, where were all the dukes and earls?
Yeah, exactly. He was stripping away the social titles to say, look, underneath all the clothes, we are the same. You see it again with John Milton defending the execution of the king in 1649. So by the time Jefferson sits down in Philadelphia, he's tapping into a very deep, very old well of thought.
Okay, speaking of tapping into wells, we have to talk about the Italian connection. This blew my mind. I had never heard of Filippo Massaia before reading this packet.
Most people haven't, but he's crucial. Massaia was an Italian physician and merchant who actually lived right next door to Jefferson in Virginia. They were close friends. I think they even started a wine company together.
So they're just hanging out, drinking wine, discussing philosophy.
And politics.
Yeah.
Massaia was, this guy was all about liberty. He wrote a series of articles in 1774, which Jefferson translated, and in them he wrote, "All men are by nature equally free and independent."
That sounds almost identical to the Declaration.
It's incredibly close. So close, in fact, that there is a joint resolution from the U.S. Congress from 1994 of all times that explicitly acknowledges Massaia's influence on the phrase. So you have this Italian Enlightened thinker whispering in Jefferson's ear, helping shape the American creed.
But this brings us to the first major hurdle, right? If Mosey and Jefferson are throwing around phrases like equally free and independent, how does that survive a room full of slave owners?
It almost didn't. And this is where the legal nuance is just fascinating. Just before the Declaration, George Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. He used that Mosey-style phrasing. All men are by nature equally free and independent.
And the Virginia Convention rejected it.
They had to. I mean, think about it. If you sign a legal document in 1776 Virginia saying everyone is equally free, you have instantly outlawed slavery. It would have caused a total economic collapse of the colony. It was factually untrue in their society.
So Mason's draft was a little too honest.
In a legal sense, yes. So Jefferson, being the lawyer he was, had to massage the language. He changed it from being equally free, which describes your current status, to created equal.
Ah, so created equal refers to the moment of birth. It's an abstract concept about your soul or your origins, not a description of your actual rights in the real world.
Exactly. It was a brilliant and, yeah, slightly cynical piece of legal maneuvering. By making it about creation, he allowed the delegates to sign it without having to free their slaves the next morning.
However, and this is where the story gets incredible, that abstract language didn't stay abstract for everyone. We have to talk about Massachusetts and the story of Bet.
This is one of the most powerful examples of words having consequences the authors didn't intend. So, in 1780, John Adams writes the Massachusetts Constitution, and he puts in the phrase, all men are born free and equal.
Which was pretty standard boilerplate by then.
Right, but there was an enslaved woman named Bet, who later became Elizabeth Freeman, living in the household of a Colonel John Ashley. The story goes that she overheard the men discussing this new constitution at the dinner table. She heard that phrase, born free and equal.
She's serving dinner, just listening to them talk about liberty.
And she takes it literally. She walks to a lawyer's office, a man named Theodore Sedgwick, and basically says, I heard that paper says we are born equal. If that's true, then I am not a slave.
And she sued him.
She sued. The case was Brom and Bet v. John Ashley, and the court agreed with her. The jury ruled that under the text of the Massachusetts Constitution, slavery could not exist. She won her freedom.
That is just profound. In Virginia, the words were a loophole to keep slavery. In Massachusetts, the same words were the hammer that smashed it.
It just shows that once you write an idea down, you lose control of it. You can't dictate how people will interpret it.
But we can't let Jefferson off the hook here. We're talking about interpretation, but let's look at the reality of 1776. We have the great contradiction. Jefferson owned hundreds of people while writing this.
It is the stain on the document that never washes out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't ignored at the time. It's not just us looking back with modern eyes.
Right. The sources mention a specific passage in Jefferson's original draft that was actually critical of slavery.
Yes. Jefferson included this long paragraph that was a scathing critique of the slave trade. He called it a cruel war against human nature itself. Now, he blamed the King of England for it, which was a bit of a deflection, but he clearly labeled the slave trade as a moral evil.
And Congress just took a red pen to it.
They cut the whole thing. The delegates from Georgia and South Carolina refused to sign if it stayed in, and the New England merchants, who were making a lot of money shipping those slaves, quietly agreed. They deleted 168 words to save the alliance.
So they chose independence over consistency.
They chose a united front over human rights. And the critics at the time noticed immediately. There was an English abolitionist named Thomas Day. In 1776, the same year, he wrote a letter that just savages the Americans.
I have that quote right here. He wrote, "If there be an object truly ridiculous in nature, it is an American patriot, signing resolutions of independency with the one hand, and with the other brandishing a whip over his affrighted slaves."
The pen and the whip, it's such a devastating image. And that tension leads right into the modern debate we see today between historians.
You mean the difference between someone like Nikole Hannah-Jones and someone like Howard Zinn?
Well, Nikole Hannah-Jones, with the 1619 Project, she argues that the founders simply did not consider black people to be part of all men. That the hypocrisy wasn't a mistake, it was a feature. That the racism was foundational.
And John Hope Franklin said something similar, right? That Jefferson never meant it for anyone other than white landowners.
Exactly. And then Zinn adds the layer of sexism. He points out that men was literally interpreted as males. Women were, in his words, beyond consideration for political rights.
Although I have heard the counter-argument that men in the 18th century was just a synonym for humanity.
Linguistically, yes. If you look at the dictionaries at the time, man often meant mankind. But legally, politically, it absolutely meant males. Women couldn't vote, couldn't own property in their own name if they were married. So even if the word was inclusive, the world wasn't.
So we have this document that is arguably a lie from the moment the ink is dry. But here is the twist that really hooked me in this deep dive. We assumed the bad guys in history, the pro-slavery faction, would just, pretend the Declaration supported them. But they didn't.
No, and this is a critical turning point. In the mid-19th century, as the Civil War gets closer, the defenders of slavery stop pretending. They realize that the Declaration is actually their enemy. They can't reconcile their worldview with all men are created equal. So they decide to attack the text itself.
They went right after the bumper sticker.
They tried to peel it right off. You have Senator John Pettit of Indiana in 1853. He stands up in the Senate and calls the phrase a self-evident lie.
A self-evident lie. That is bold. He's not mincing words there.
Not at all. And it gets worse. Look at Alexander Stephens. He was the vice president of the Confederacy. In 1861, just weeks before the Civil War starts, he gives the cornerstone speech.
This speech is terrifying to read.
It is. He explicitly says that the American founders were wrong. He says their idea of equality was a sandy foundation. And then he says the Confederacy is founded on the opposite idea. The great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man.
So the Civil War wasn't just a fight over territory or states' rights. It was a fight over whether that sentence in the Declaration was true or false.
Exactly. The Confederacy was an attempt to explicitly reject the Declaration of Independence.
So how do we get it back? If the South rejected it and the North was still pretty racist by modern standards, who saved the phrase?
Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln is the one who dusted it off and repurposed it.
Yeah.
He had a very, very interesting interpretation. He argued that the founders didn't mean men were equal in capacity like we aren't all equal in height or strength or intelligence.
Right. I'm never going to be equal to Einstein in physics.
Right. Lincoln said they meant equal in rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But he went further than that. He called the Declaration a standard maxim for free society.
A standard maxim? What does that even mean?
He meant it was an aspiration, a North Star. He said the founders knew they couldn't achieve perfect equality in 1776, but they placed it there as a goal, something to be constantly approached, even if never perfectly reached. He turned it from a statement of fact into a mission statement.
That feels like the bridge to the modern understanding. But there's another historian in our stack, Jack Rakove, who throws a curveball at this whole individual rights thing.
Rakove is great because he forces us to take off our 21st century glasses. He argues that when Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," he wasn't thinking about me and you as individuals. He was thinking about peoples.
Collective groups.
Yes, he was saying the American people are equal to the British people. It was a diplomatic argument for sovereignty. We are just as good as you, so you have no right to rule us. Rakove suggests that the idea of individual personal rights, that I am equal to you, is something that Americans projected onto the document later, over the next few decades.
So we basically remixed the song. We took a diplomatic letter and turned it into a personal creed.
And that remix went global. The legacy of that one phrase is astonishing.
I was shocked to see Vietnam in the breakdown.
1945, Ho Chi Minh declares independence from France. And how does he start his speech? He quotes the American Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal.
Using America's words to declare independence, essentially from the West.
From colonial power. It shows how universal the language had become. But then, look at the flip side. Look at Rhodesia, what is now Zimbabwe, in 1965.
The white minority government there issued their own Declaration of Independence, right?
They did. And they modeled it almost word for word on the American one, but they made a very specific edit. They kept the structure, but they deliberately cut out all men are created equal and consent of the governed.
Wow. That's the exception that proves the rule. They knew they couldn't say those words and keep their apartheid system.
Exactly. They knew the words were dangerous. If you say them, eventually you have to answer to them.
And that brings us to the man who made America answer to them, Martin Luther King Jr.
The ultimate closer for this timeline. In his I Have a Dream speech, King doesn't burn the Declaration. He doesn't call it a lie. He calls it a promissory note.
The check.
A check that had come back marked insufficient funds. It was a brilliant rhetorical move. He wasn't asking for something new. He was demanding that America simply pay what it owed. He used the founders' own words to hold the country accountable.
It seems like that is the recurring pattern. The words are written, often by hypocrites, but then the words take on a life of their own and demand to be made true.
That's the paradox, isn't it? Self-evident sounds like it means automatic. But history shows us that these truths are anything but automatic. They have to be fought for, argued over, and constantly redefined.
So if we look at the whole arc, from a philosophical edit by Franklin, to a legal loophole by Jefferson, to a rejected lie by the Confederacy, and finally a demand for payment by MLK, what are we left with?
We're left with a living document. The definition of all men, who counts as a person, has expanded. The definition of equal, what rights you get, has expanded. And it hasn't expanded by accident. It expanded because people like Mum Bet and Martin Luther King took the words more seriously than the people who wrote them.
That's a powerful way to put it. They believed the text more than the authors did.
They really did.
Here's a final thought I want to leave everyone with. We've spent this time talking about how the definition of all men has grown over 250 years to finally include Black people, women, and non-landowners. But history doesn't stop in 2025.
No, it certainly doesn't.
So you have to wonder, if we look back at 1776 and see these obvious blind spots, what are the blind spots today? Who are we currently excluding from all men? And when people look back at us in the year 2076, will they think our definition of equality was just as limited as Jefferson's?
That is the uncomfortable question, isn't it? The circle of re is always trying to grow, but it's always a struggle.
Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next one.